Can you imagine what it's like to be inside a tank, with the ground trembling beneath your feet, the roar of explosions tearing through the air, and the only thing between you and death being inches of steel? Can you imagine looking through the visor of an M1 Abrams and seeing only smoke, fire and chaos, and still having to keep a cool head, obey orders, and keep going? Because it is precisely in this place that our story begins. It's the Iraqi desert. The heat is stifling, but no one feels it. Adrenaline takes over everything. Inside that tank, a young American soldier is part of a combat operation that will mark every second of the rest of his life. The radio crackles with orders. The other combat vehicles advance across the sand, raising dust, and outside, the enemy gives no respite. Every move could be the last. Every breath is a silent victory. He survived that day, and many other days like it. Now, cut to the next scene. It's an ordinary afternoon in Columbus, Ohio, the backyard of a simple house surrounded by a quiet neighborhood. Birds singing, children playing in the street out front, the kind of peace anyone would dream of having. And there, sitting in a faded plastic chair, is he, the same soldier, uniform swapped for a t-shirt, combat boots replaced by flip-flops. But his eyes tell a completely different story. Empty, distant. Lost somewhere that isn't this backyard, isn't this street, isn't this country. He returned home, but part of him stayed there. Have you ever experienced that feeling of being somewhere and yet not being there? Of looking around and feeling like you no longer belong? That something inside you has changed in a way that no one can see, but that you feel in every detail of your day. Now multiply that by months of struggle, by losses that cannot be put into words, by images that won't leave your head even when you close your eyes. This is what thousands of American veterans live through in silence every day. They crossed battlefields, operated tanks and armored vehicles under live fire, saw things that most people only see in movies, and returned carrying all of that on their chests, without a manual, without preparation, without warnings. War has a beginning and an end on maps and in the news, but in the minds of those who were there, it has no end in sight. What you are about to discover may surprise you, and perhaps even change the way you see the heroes who walk among us unnoticed. Because this is not just a story about war. It's a story about survival of the most difficult kind there is. The battle fought within one's own mind, far from the tanks, far from the battlefield, but equally dangerous, equally real. Stay with me until the end, because what this soldier faced after setting foot on American soil will leave you speechless. Do you know what's most impressive about this story? It's that it's not unique. It's not an isolated case that happened somewhere far away and has nothing to do with your life. On the contrary, it represents tens of thousands of men and women who served this country, who operated combat vehicles in hostile territories, who slept inside tanks with one eye open, and who, when they finally returned home, discovered that the greatest battlefield was within themselves. And the silence surrounding it is deafening. Most people pass the veteran in line at the supermarket, at the bank, at the gas station, and have no idea of the weight he carries. They don't see the sleepless nights. They don't hear the noises he still hears when the world is completely quiet. They don't understand why a car horn in the street can paralyze a man trained for combat in the middle of the sidewalk. His heart racing as if he were back in the desert, inside that M1 Abrams, waiting for the next impact. This invisibility hurts as much as any physical wound, sometimes even more. And that's exactly why content like this needs to exist. It needs to be seen. It needs to be shared. Because every time someone watches, comments, or simply stops to reflect on what they're hearing, a story that was buried in silence gains a voice. And a voice can change everything. If this topic resonates with you, if these words touched on something you felt, experienced firsthand, or simply believe deserves more attention, leave a comment below describing what has resonated with you the most so far. It could be a word, a phrase, or a memory that came to mind while you were watching. There are no right or wrong answers. What exists is a community of people who care, and your comment is part of that. And if you haven't liked this video yet, now's the time. It's not just a click. It's a sign that this kind of story matters, that you believe it deserves to reach more people. The algorithm responds to that, and each like is a real way to make this message travel further, to reach someone who might need to hear exactly what you're hearing right now. If you're not already part of the channel War Reborn, subscribe now. This is where stories like this get the space they deserve. Stories of pain, resistance, impossible transformation, and lives completely rewritten by war. Your subscription is what keeps this channel alive and allows us to continue bringing content that goes far beyond entertainment. This is memory. This is respect. This is humanity. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. And believe me, that makes a real difference in the lives of those on the other side of the screen, including veterans who may never have felt seen before. Now that we've established this connection, it's time to fully immerse ourselves in this story. Because what this soldier experienced before stepping onto that battlefield, who he was, where he came from, what led him to wear that uniform, is the kind of detail that completely changes how you'll perceive everything that follows. He grew up in Dayton, Ohio, a city that most people can't even locate on a map without a second thought. One of those small American towns that has its own rhythm, the cold mornings, the slow afternoons, the neighbors who know each other by name, the family weekends, the football fields packed with people on Friday nights. A normal city of normal people with normal dreams. And it was precisely in this ordinary setting, in this life without any sign of grandeur or extraordinary destiny, that this soldier's story began. He was no different from any other boy who grew up in that neighborhood. He rode his bike down the same streets, ate at the same corner diner, watched the same movies, listened to the same music. But there was something inside him, a kind of unquenchable flame, a restlessness that had no name, but that everyone who knew him could feel. He was the kind of person who couldn't imagine a life just passing the days. He needed purpose. He needed something bigger than himself. And it was the army that answered that call. At 19, he signed the papers. Simple as that. No exaggerated ceremony, no drama. A decision made with the calm conviction of someone who knows exactly what he's doing, or at least believes he knows. The family was there, proud. His mother held back tears as best she could. His father shook his son's hand with that firmness that speaks louder than any speech. Friends joked to disguise how much they would miss him, and he was gone. Basic training was a reality check, as it always is. The body he thought was in shape discovered muscles he'd never used. The mind, he thought, was strong-faced levels of pressure no ordinary day in Dayton had prepared him for. Waking before sunrise, running with heavy equipment on his back, obeying orders without question, learning to function on the edge of exhaustion. All of this was building a version of him that the kid on a bike in rural Ohio could never have imagined becoming. And when he first donned that uniform, with the insignia on his arm and his boots polished, there was a glint in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A glint of purpose, of belonging, of identity. He was no longer just a boy from Dayton. He was a soldier in the United States Army, and that meant everything to him. What nobody talks about regarding this moment, and this is one of the hidden truths that few people honestly discuss, is that the transformation that begins in training isn't just physical, it's profound, structural, almost irreversible. The army doesn't just train the body, It reprograms the mind. It teaches a completely different way of thinking, reacting, and seeing the world. And this has immense value on the battlefield. But out there, in the civilian world, this same reprogramming can become a burden that very few people can understand. But at that moment, he knew none of that. He only knew that he was ready, that he had been trained to serve, and that the mission was calling. The destination was Iraq. And then everything changes, because it's one thing to hear about war, to read about war, to see images of war on the news or in a documentary, from the safety of your living room with a remote control in your hand. It's quite another thing, and here I need you to really stop and try to imagine this. To be inside an M1 Abrams tank, with the weight of 68 tons of steel around your body, advancing along deserted roads in the sweltering desert heat, not knowing what awaits you on the other side of the next bend. The M1 Abrams is not just a war vehicle, it's a statement, a fortress on wheels. Inside it, you feel simultaneously invincible and vulnerable in a way that is unparalleled. Invincible because that steel is designed to absorb impacts that would destroy anything else. Vulnerable because you know, everyone knows, that no metal in the world protects against everything. And the enemy also knows where the weak points are. The crew inside a tank functions as a single organism. Each has their function, their position, their responsibility. The commander reading the terrain, the gunner with eyes glued to the sights, the loader with mechanical and precise cadence, the driver interpreting every vibration of the ground as its own language. There is no room for error. There is no margin for hesitation. And there is no silence. There is never silence. The engine roars constantly. The radio crackles with communications, and outside, when the situation heats up, the noise of explosions and gunfire mixes with all of this in a chaos that the body learns to process in a way that defies all logic. The first few weeks on the battlefield were a period of intense adaptation. The heat of the Iraqi desert was unlike any heat he had ever felt before in Ohio. It was a heat that dried everything out. His lips, his throat, his thoughts. Sand got into everything, his equipment, his clothes, his eyes, and the sun was relentless, casting light on everything with a clarity that seemed artificial, as if the scenery were too vast, too real to be true. The patrols began early. Convoys of armored Humvees followed predetermined routes, searching for threats, ambush points, and improvised explosive devices hidden by the roadside. Every meter traveled was a constant risk assessment. Every object out of place, every suspicious movement, every vehicle stopped on the shoulder could be the beginning of something that would change everything. And then there were the night operations. These he would later describe as the most intense of all his combat experiences. With night vision equipment, the world becomes a ghostly green landscape, where shadows gain depth and silence carries a different weight. The absence of light, which should bring tranquility, transforms into a constant source of tension, because in the dark, anything could be waiting. You see enough to move, but never enough to be certain. And this uncertainty, maintained for hours on end, night after night, begins to do something to the human mind that goes far beyond physical exhaustion. The body learns to function in a state of maximum alert for extended periods. Adrenaline becomes a constant companion. Sleep becomes merely a necessary interruption between one state of vigilance and another. And slowly, almost without you realizing it, the line between mission and existence begins to blur. You are no longer just following orders, you are surviving, and surviving becomes the only thing that matters. This is one of the behind-the-scenes aspects of war that rarely appears in films or political speeches. It's not the heroism of recruitment posters. It's the stark reality of what happens to a human being when subjected to weeks, months of constant psychological pressure. The impact on the brain is measurable, documented, real, and it begins much earlier than most people would imagine. But he pressed on, because that was what they had trained him to do, because his teammates depended on it, because retreating was not an option, neither mentally nor physically, and because deep down there was still that flame of purpose that had brought him this far, resisting even if increasingly obscured by the weight of what he was experiencing. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened on one particular afternoon, in an operation that began like any other and ended in a way no one could have predicted, is the true heart of this whole story. It's the moment that divides his life in two, before and after, and understanding this moment with the depth it deserves is fundamental to understanding everything that followed. It was an afternoon like so many others in Iraq, if any afternoon in that place could be called ordinary. The sun was already setting on the horizon, painting the desert with that orange hue that under other circumstances could be described as beautiful. The convoy followed the established route, the combat vehicles maintaining a safe distance, the soldiers inside each one carrying out their duties with the precision that training had instilled in them. And then everything happened at once. An explosion to the right of the convoy, not in the distance, right beside it, so close that the heat arrived even before the sound. The Humvee in front was thrown aside as if it were a toy. The radio exploded with simultaneous communications. The training kicked in automatically. Combat positions, quadrant verification, threat identification, communication with command. But beneath all this mechanical and trained response lay something no manual can prepare you for. The pure, primal terror of being alive while chaos unfolds around you. And in the midst of that chaos, he saw something that would be forever etched in some part of his brain that never sleeps, never forgets, and never stops repeating. A companion. Someone he had eaten with the night before, someone he had exchanged messages with to his family. Someone he had shared a silly joke with to ease the tension of the previous days. That face he knew, now lifeless amidst the dust and smoke. The smell of metal and gunpowder mixed with sand. The noise that continued even after the shooting stopped, echoing inside the tank, inside the head, inside the chest. And that split-second paralysis, which seems to last an eternity, where the brain tries to process what the eyes are seeing and simply cannot fit that image into any known category of reality. This is the moment. This is the kind of experience that trauma specialists call a defining event, that specific instant that the brain marks with an intensity unlike any other memory, and which begins to function as a kind of psychological anchor, pulling the person back to that point repeatedly, even when the danger has long since passed. The mission continued, because it had to continue. He returned to base that night. He wrote his report. He ate something. He tried to sleep. And it was in that attempt to sleep that he realized for the first time that something had changed, that a door had closed inside him, and that the key to that door was buried somewhere in that desert under the sand, inaccessible. He continued serving. He completed the remainder of his mission with the discipline and commitment he had always demonstrated. Outwardly, the soldier remained functional, present, operational. Inwardly, something was reorganizing itself in a way he didn't understand and lacked the tools to name. It was as if a part of his internal system had entered emergency mode and simply didn't know how to return to normal, because normal had ceased to make sense. And then the day of the return arrived. Fort Worth Airport, Texas, was buzzing with the chaotic and exciting activity that always accompanies the arrival of soldiers on American soil. Families, children with colorful signs, flags, hugs that last too long because nobody wants to be the first to let go. Tears mixed with smiles, an intense blend of relief, gratitude, and joy that envelops the entire space with an almost tangible energy. And he was right there, in the middle of it all, receiving his mother's embrace, hearing his father's words, seeing the faces of the people he loved, who had prayed for him every day, who had counted each week of his absence, and feeling, and here is one of the most painful truths of this whole story, feeling very little. It wasn't ingratitude, it wasn't coldness, it wasn't a lack of love. It was something he couldn't explain, and for that very reason, it frightened him more than any explosion he had faced in the desert. It was as if the emotions were there, existing somewhere inside him, but separated by a thick glass he couldn't break through. He saw the scene. He knew he should feel that joy. But access to it was blocked by something that didn't yet have a name. In the first few days back home, the family attributed the distance to travel fatigue, jet lag, and the readjustment process. Natural, understandable, give it time. And he believed it too. Or at least, he tried to believe it, but time passed, and things didn't get better. They got worse. Sleep, which had already become fragmented in the last weeks of the mission, was now almost non-existent. When he did manage to sleep, his dreams took him back to the desert, to the heat, the smoke, the noise, that face. I would wake up with my heart racing, drenched in sweat, my brain in combat mode inside a quiet room in Ohio. And it would take minutes, sometimes many minutes, to separate dream from reality. Everyday noises became triggers, a car horn, a balloon popping, the sound of something falling to the floor in another room. Anything sudden and unexpected triggered an immediate physical response. His entire body preparing for a threat that didn't exist, responding to a danger that only existed in his memory, but which, to his nervous system, was absolutely real. He began to avoid crowded places, supermarkets, shopping malls, public events, any environment with many variables, lots of movement, lots of noise. His mind, trained to map threats on the battlefield, couldn't simply switch off that process when entering a supermarket aisle. It continued scanning the environment, identifying exits, analyzing faces, calculating risks. And that was exhausting in a way that's impossible to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. The family noticed, and they didn't know what to do, because the man who had returned was physically the same as the one who had left. Same eyes, same voice, same face. But there was a distance about him that hadn't existed before, a present absence, if that contradiction makes any sense. He was there, but he wasn't. He responded when someone spoke to him, but from somewhere that seemed far away. He smiled when the situation demanded it, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was in this context that the name first appeared. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. 4 words that, for most people, sound like a distant clinical diagnosis, something that happens to other people in extreme situations. But for those experiencing it firsthand, without yet having that name, the arrival of the diagnosis is both a relief and a sentence. Relief because there is finally an explanation for what seemed inexplicable. A sentence because naming the problem doesn't make it disappear, and because the social weight that this diagnosis still carries is real, heavy, and unfair. What happens in the brain of a veteran with PTSD is not weakness. It's not a lack of character. It's not a choice. It's neuroscience, it's physiology. It's the predictable and documented result of what happens when a human nervous system is subjected to extreme levels of stress for prolonged periods. The hippocampus, which is the region of the brain responsible for processing and storing memories, partially collapses during intense traumatic events. Traumatic memories are not stored in the same way as ordinary memories. They remain trapped in a state of activation without proper temporal marking, as if the event was still happening. That's why flashbacks don't feel like memories. They feel like presences. The brain isn't recalling the past. It's reliving the present. And the body responds accordingly, with all the hormonal surge, increased heart rate, muscle tension, and fight-or-flight response that would accompany a real threat. More than 20 American veterans take their own lives every day. 20 per day, every day. This number needs to land. It needs to be felt. Because behind each of these statistics, there is a story like the one you are witnessing now. There is a boy who grew up in some small town, who wore the uniform with pride, who served his country with everything he had, and who returned home without the necessary tools to deal with what had remained inside his head. The issue isn't a lack of courage. Those who face what these men and women face inside a tank, in nighttime desert operations, on missions where the line between life and death is measured in milliseconds, those people don't lack courage. The issue is a lack of support, a lack of a culture that normalizes asking for help, a lack of adequate infrastructure to care for those returning from war with wounds that don't show up on physical exams, but are just as real as any visible injury. And this is where his story enters its darkest moment. Because when the diagnosis came, instead of opening a door to recovery, it first opened a period of denial. Because accepting PTSD meant, in his mind, admitting that the war had won some part of him. And that was unacceptable for someone who had been trained to never back down, never give in, never show vulnerability. Alcohol entered the picture as a temporary solution that became permanent with frightening speed. Why does it work at first? It dulls the edges, it silences the inner noise for a few hours, it allows sleep to come without dreams, and it's accessible, social, and widely accepted, which makes it particularly treacherous. No one questions a veteran having a beer with friends. No one sees the problem as long as it still fits within the social norms of what is acceptable. But the problem was there, growing silently beneath the surface of apparent normality. The distance from his family grew, conversations became shorter, appointments were cancelled one by one. The days when he had no energy to get out of bed became more frequent than the days when he did. And the flame that had driven that boy from Dayton to sign his army papers at age 19, that flame of purpose, of belonging, of identity, was almost extinguished. This is rock bottom. And anyone who has been there, not necessarily because of war, but because of any kind of trauma, loss, or profound rupture, knows that rock bottom has a very specific characteristic. It convinces you that it's the only place where you fit, that it's where you belong, that there's no ladder, no way out, no outstretched hand that can reach you. This is the cruelest lie that trauma tells, and it's convincing because it comes from within, with your own voice. The isolation deepened. Entire days without speaking to anyone. The television was on, not to watch, but to fill the silence that would otherwise be unbearable. Food that lost its flavor. Music that had ceased to make sense. An existence that continued biologically, but had paused in almost every other aspect. And outside, the world went on. People went to work, planned vacations, celebrated birthdays, complained about traffic, discussed American football and politics, and the price of gasoline. Ordinary life continued with its irritatingly normal routine, and he observed all this from a distance that seemed to increase each day, as if he were inside an aquarium, seeing the world through the glass, unable to cross to the other side. No one knew the true depth of what was happening, because he wouldn't tell. Because there were no words that seemed adequate, because every time he tried to begin to explain, the distance between what he had experienced and what anyone on the outside could understand seemed too great to be bridged by language. And because deep down, there was a silent and persistent belief that no one should have to carry that burden along with him, that it was his responsibility, that he had chosen to serve, and that the consequences of that choice were his to manage alone. This is one of the most common and destructive mindsets among veterans returning with trauma. The idea that pain should be contained, internalized, managed individually, as if asking for help were an improper transfer of a burden that belongs to you. But here's the truth his journey will reveal. Carrying an impossible weight alone isn't strength. It's just a slower way to collapse. And the collapse was coming. It was in this context that a call came, on an unremarkable afternoon. The phone rang. On the other end, a familiar voice, someone from a veterans group who had tried to contact them several times before, without success. A voice that didn't judge, didn't pressure, didn't demand, that simply said, directly and without drama, "We're here. Whenever you're ready. You don't need to be okay. You don't need to have answers. You just need to show up." Those words, simple, unadorned, without promises of cure or immediate solution, were the first to pierce the glass of the aquarium in a long time. It wasn't an instant transformation. There wasn't that cinematic moment where everything changes in one scene. The reality of trauma recovery is much more granular, much more non-linear, much more like building something brick by brick than flipping a switch. But that connection was the first brick, and sometimes the first brick is everything. The Veteran Support Group in Chicago wasn't glamorous. It was an ordinary room, chairs in a circle, faces with heavy stories, bad coffee on a corner table. But it was real. It was honest. And there was something there that he hadn't found anywhere else since returning from Iraq. People who understood without needing explanation. People who had also been inside tanks, had done night patrols, had lost comrades, had returned home carrying things that wouldn't fit in any suitcase. Shared silence has a different weight than solitary silence, and for the first time in a long time, the silence within him began to feel less like absence and more like space for something new to begin to grow. Therapy came later. A professional specializing in combat trauma, who understood the language, who wasn't intimidated by details, who knew how to ask the right questions at the right time, and, equally important, knew when not to ask any questions and just be there. The process was slow. There were sessions that seemed to lead nowhere. There were weeks of regression after weeks of progress. There were moments when the temptation to return to isolation was so strong that only the inertia of already being in the process kept it moving forward. But there were also other moments, the first nights of uninterrupted sleep. The first day you managed to go to the supermarket without having to rush. The first time you heard a loud noise and your heart didn't race as if you were back in the desert. Small victories, invisible to anyone on the outside, but monumental to those who were living that journey from within. And then, in Austin, Texas, where he had moved to start over, something surprising began to happen. Other veterans around him were going through the same thing. Different stories, different wars, different traumas, but the same fundamental loneliness. The same feeling of not belonging to the civilian world. The same difficulty in finding language for what they had lived through. And he realized he had something they needed. Not answers, not solutions, but presence, understanding. The voice of someone who had been at rock bottom and had found the first brick. The transformation didn't erase the pain. This needs to be said clearly, because the narrative that romanticizes recovery as an erasure of suffering does a huge disservice to those in the midst of the process. The pain doesn't disappear. The memories don't vanish. The partner's face still appears sometimes, in dreams or unexpected moments. The desert is still there, in some layer of memory, with its heat and smoke and the smell of metal. But the relationship with that pain changed. It ceased to be the center that organized everything around it and became a part of the story, a part of what makes him who he is today, like a scar that doesn't disappear but also doesn't bleed anymore. That tells something about where you came from without trapping you in that place. The mindset that emerged from this process, and this is the part that matters most to those following this story, is not the mindset of someone who has overcome trauma. It is the mindset of someone who has learned to carry it in a different way, who has transformed the weight into fuel, who has used the depth of their own pain as a measure of their ability to understand the pain of others. And that's what built something bigger than any military mission he had ever accomplished. If you've made it this far in the video, you already understand that this isn't just a story about war. It's a story about what happens to a human being when they're pushed to the limits of what they can bear, a need to find something within themselves that keeps them standing when everything else crumbles. It's a story about decisions made in the dark, with no guarantee of outcome, about the silent courage to show up for a call when you're not sure you'll be able to say a single word. It's about the impact that a single moment of genuine connection can have on an entire life's journey. And it's about the hidden truth that no veteran's welcome speech usually mentions, that returning home is only the beginning of another mission. That the battle that takes place within the human mind after combat is as real, as dangerous, and as worthy of attention as any physical battlefield. Comment below, "I see you, soldier." If you've made it this far, you haven't just watched a video. You've followed an entire life. From the small town of Dayton to the Iraqi desert, from the tank to rock bottom, and from there to Austin, Texas, where a broken man found a way to rebuild himself differently, more deeply, and more whole than before. This is no small thing. And your presence here up to this point means that this kind of story makes sense to you. That you believe, just as I believe, that talking about this matters. If this video touched you in a way, a memory, a reflection, a feeling you didn't expect to find here, leave a comment with the phrase, "That message was for me." That's all. No need to explain anything. It'll be enough to know that we made it to the end together. And if you felt it was worth your time, that you learned something, or that you simply felt more human after reading this story, a like is the simplest way to say that. It doesn't have to be out of obligation. It only makes sense if you truly felt something. The channel War Reborn It exists precisely for this reason, to bring stories that don't appear in the news, that remain hidden behind medals and uniforms, but that carry within them a truth about human beings that is worth knowing. If you want to continue receiving this type of content, subscribing ensures you won't miss the next ones. It's just one click and it puts you in this community. There's a video over here that perfectly complements what we saw today. Click on it and continue watching. I'll be waiting for you.